The most powerful Korean mafia boss in Seoul had just fired his 50th chef this month. Kang Young-hoon sat at the head of a mahogany table that felt like a vast, empty desert, his eyes fixed on a plate of lobster that looked like a work of art but tasted like ash to him. The chef, a man who had won awards across 3 continents, stood trembling in the corner of the opulent dining room. Young-hoon picked up a silver fork, his movements slow and predatory, and took a single bite. He chewed slowly, his expression remaining an unreadable mask of cold stone, before he reached for a silk napkin and spat the food out with a look of utter weariness. "You spent 4 hours on this dish, didn't you?" Young-hoon asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. The chef stammered, saying he had used the finest ingredients flown in from the Mediterranean. Young-hoon stood up, his tall, imposing figure casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light. "It is technically perfect," he said, stepping closer to the terrified man. "The temperature is exact. The seasoning is precise. But it is empty. It is a meal for a ghost, and I am still very much alive. Take your knives and go before I decide that your lack of passion is an insult I can no longer tolerate." As the chef fled, Young-hoon's right-hand man, Min-ho, stepped forward, his face etched with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Sir, you haven't eaten a full meal in weeks," Min-ho said quietly, looking at the hollows beneath his boss's eyes. "The doctors are worried about your strength. Perhaps we should look into traditional healers or perhaps a different style of cuisine." Young-hoon turned to the window, looking out over the glittering, heartless lights of Seoul. "I am not sick, Min-ho," he replied, his voice heavy with a loneliness that no amount of power could cure. "I am simply starving for something that doesn't taste like a transaction. I want something that feels like it was made by someone who actually cares if I live or die. Find me that, or stop bringing people into my home." He felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, a reminder that despite all his billions and the fear he commanded, he was still just a man who couldn't find a reason to enjoy the sun rising. He needed a miracle, but in his world, miracles usually came with a high body count and a heavy price tag. In the narrow, winding alleys of a forgotten corner of the city, a young woman named Aisha was waking up in a room so small the ceiling seemed to press down on her dreams. The walls were thin enough to hear the heartbeat of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the shouting of neighbors, and the persistent drip of a leaky pipe. Despite the damp chill in the air, Aisha moved with a sense of purpose and dignity that defied her surroundings. She reached for her most prized possession, which hung on a single wire hanger, a crisp, white chef outfit and a matching tall chef hat. She laundered them every single night by hand in a plastic basin, scrubbing until her fingers were raw, because to her, this uniform was more than just clothing. It was her dignity and her promise to herself. Aisha had come to Korea with a dream of opening a restaurant that would serve as a bridge between her heritage and the world she now called home. But the world had been cold. She spent her days scrubbing floors and her nights studying flavor profiles on a single portable burner. As she carefully pinned her hair back and placed the white chef hat on her head, she looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror. "Today is going to be different," she whispered to herself, her voice a soft but steady anchor in the quiet room. "You have the fire, Aisha. You just need someone to see the light." She adjusted the collar of her white jacket, ensuring every line was straight. She knew that in this city, people saw her skin before they saw her skill, and they saw her poverty before they saw her heart. She tucked a small, worn notebook filled with handwritten recipes into her pocket, the pages stained with turmeric and oil. She stepped out into the cold morning air, her white uniform a stark contrast to the gray grime of the alleyway. She didn't know that she was walking toward a destiny that would change the power balance of the entire city. She only knew that she had a bag of fresh spices, a sharp knife, and a hunger to prove that she belonged. Have you ever felt like you were standing on the edge of something massive, just waiting for the wind to push you? That was the feeling in Aisha's chest as she walked toward the market, unaware that a black sedan was already circling her world. Min-ho was driving through the city in a state of quiet desperation when his car's engine let out a final, sputtering groan near a small, crowded market. He stepped out of the vehicle, his expensive suit clashing violently with the dirt of the street, and felt a wave of irritation. He was supposed to be scouring the high-end districts for a new chef, not waiting for a mechanic in the middle of a slum. As he paced the sidewalk, a scent caught his attention, a smell so rich, so complex, and so incredibly inviting that it stopped his breath. It wasn't the smell of the fried street food he was used to. It was something deeper, something that smelled like smoke, sunshine, and 1,000 years of tradition. He followed the scent like a man in a trance, weaving through the crowds until he reached a tiny, makeshift stall where Aisha was cooking a simple stew for a group of elderly street vendors. She was wearing her pristine white chef outfit and hat, standing tall and focused as she stirred a large pot. Minho watched as one of the vendors took a bite and immediately closed his eyes, a look of pure bliss spreading across his weathered face. "Excuse me," Minho said, his voice cutting through the noise of the market. "What is that smell? I have never encountered anything like it in this city." Aisha looked up, her eyes clear and unafraid despite Minho's intimidating presence. "It is a stew of resilience," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "It is made from the ingredients the earth gives us when we have nothing else. Would you like a bowl, or are you just here to stare at the help?" Minho, usually a man of few words and even less appetite, found himself nodding. He took the bowl from her hands, the warmth of it seeping into his palms. The first spoonful was a revelation. It was bold, spicy, and layered with flavors he couldn't identify, but more than that, it felt alive. He finished the entire bowl in minutes. He looked at Aisha, truly seeing her for the first time, the crispness of her white uniform, the confidence in her stance. "Who taught you to cook like this?" he asked, his tone shifting from curiosity to genuine respect. "My grandmother taught me that food is the only thing that can heal a broken spirit," Aisha said, wiping her hands on her apron. Minho knew in that moment he had found the answer to Young-hoon's hunger. "I have a job for you," he said. "It pays more than you can imagine, but the man you will cook for is not an easy man to please. Are you brave enough to try?" Aisha looked at her white chef hat, then back at Minho. "I didn't come this far to be afraid of a hungry man," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. The car ride to the mansion was silent, Aisha staring out the window as the landscape shifted from the vibrant, chaotic streets she knew to the cold, high-walled estates of the elite. When they arrived at Young-hoon's residence, Aisha felt a chill run down her spine at the sheer coldness of the architecture. It was a place of iron and stone, built to keep the world out and the secrets in. Minho led her through the vast, echoing hallways, past armed guards who looked at her with blatant skepticism. A young black woman in a chef's uniform was the last person they expected to see in the inner sanctum of the Black Tiger. They reached the kitchen, a massive, sterile room filled with the most expensive appliances money could buy, yet it felt like a laboratory rather than a place of soul. The existing kitchen staff, led by a man named Chef Choi, stopped their work to stare. "Who is this?" Choi asked, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked at Aisha's simple tools. "This is the new candidate," Minho said firmly. "She has 1 hour to prepare a dish for the boss." "Stay out of her way," Choi laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "She looks like she belongs in a cafeteria, not a kitchen like this. Look at her outfit. She thinks she's a professional." Aisha didn't flinch. She stepped up to the main station, her white chef hat held high. "A professional is defined by what they produce, not by who they know," she said, her voice cutting through Choi's laughter. "Now, unless you plan on helping me chop these onions, I suggest you step back." She began to move, her hands flying as she organized her space. She didn't use the expensive truffles or the imported saffron. Instead, she pulled out the spices she had brought from her own small room. She cooked with a fierce intensity, the steam rising around her like a protective veil. She could feel the eyes of the other cooks on her, waiting for her to fail, but she didn't let their doubt enter her pot. She poured every bit of her struggle, her hope, and her heritage into the dish. As the hour drew to a close, she plated the food with meticulous care, the vibrant colors of the vegetables standing out against the white porcelain. She looked at Minho and nodded. "It is ready," she said. "But tell your boss that this food requires him to be present. If he eats it while thinking of his business, he will taste nothing but salt." Minho looked at her with a new sense of awe. "I'll tell him," he whispered. "But pray he's in a mood to listen." Minho led her into the dining room where Jung-hoon sat, his eyes dark and shadowed by a fatigue that seemed to reach his very soul. He didn't even look up as Aisha approached the table, his posture suggesting he was already prepared to send her away. Aisha placed the dish before him, the steam rising in delicate, fragrant swirls. He looked at the plate, then slowly looked up at Aisha. He seemed momentarily stunned by her appearance, the stark white of her chef outfit against her dark skin, the height of her hat, and the unwavering gaze in her eyes. "You are the one Minho claims will change my mind?" Jung-hoon asked, his voice cold and skeptical. "I am the one who will feed you if you are willing to eat," Aisha replied, her voice steady. Jung-hoon picked up his spoon, his movements slow and deliberate. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he took the first bite. The guards and the housekeepers watched from the shadows, expecting him to erupt in anger. But as the flavors hit his tongue, Jung-hoon's hand trembled. The complexity of the spices, the tenderness of the meat, and the deep, underlying warmth of the broth seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He took another bite, then another, his pace quickening as if he were a starving man finding water in a desert. He ate in total silence, the only sound being the clinking of the spoon against the porcelain. When the plate was completely clean, he set the spoon down and looked at Aisha for a long time. "What did you put in this?" he asked, his voice no longer cold but filled with a strange, raw vulnerability. "I put in the truth," Aisha said. "I put in the memory of the earth and the heat of the fire. I put in the things you have forgotten while you were busy being powerful." Jung-hoon stood up, walking toward her until he was only inches away. The guards instinctively reached for their weapons, but he waved them back. "I haven't tasted home since I was 10 years old," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "How did you find it in a kitchen you've never been in?" Aisha looked him in the eye. "Because hunger is the same in every language, Mr. Kong. You weren't looking for a chef. You were looking for a person." Jung-hoon turned to Minho, his eyes shining with a light that hadn't been there in years. "She stays," he commanded. "She is not to be questioned, she is not to be bothered, and she is to have whatever she needs. This girl is the only thing in this house that isn't a lie." Aisha felt a surge of triumph, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. She had fed the boss, but she still had to survive the mansion. The news of Aisha's sudden elevation to personal chef for the boss sent shockwaves through the household. Within the cold, sprawling mansion, the atmosphere shifted from curious suspicion to sharp, jagged resentment. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper who had served the Kong family for 30 years, watched Aisha with eyes like flint. Every morning, Aisha would descend to the kitchen, her white chef outfit glowing under the harsh lights, and she could feel the weight of a dozen gazes burning into her. The other cooks purposefully misplaced her favorite knives and left the burners on high to burn her sauces. One morning, Mrs. Park approached Aisha while she was prepping breakfast. "Do not think that because you have pleased the boss for a day, you are one of us," the older woman hissed, her voice a sharp contrast to her polite uniform. "You are a guest here, a temporary distraction. Eventually, he will grow bored of your exotic flavors and return to what is proper." Aisha didn't stop her work. She continued to slice green onions with rhythmic precision. "I am not here to be one of you, Mrs. Park," Aisha replied, her voice cool and professional. "I am here to do a job that none of you were able to do. If that bothers you, perhaps you should ask yourself why you stopped caring about the food you serve." Mrs. Park narrowed her eyes. "You have a dangerous tongue, girl. Be careful it doesn't get you cut." Aisha finally looked up, her white chef hat making her look taller than the housekeeper. "My tongue is fine," she said. "It's my hands you should be watching. They're much faster." Despite the hostility, Aisha stayed focused. She knew that her only protection was the quality of her work. She spent hours perfecting her dishes, making sure every plate that left the kitchen was a testament to her skill. She began to notice small changes in the mansion. The guards started nodding to her as she passed. The younger maids would linger near the kitchen just to catch a whiff of her cooking. She realized that she was slowly changing the energy of the house, one meal at a time. But she also knew that the more power she gained, the more dangerous her position became. In a world built on hierarchy, an outsider with the boss's ear was a target. She checked the locks on her door every night, her white chef jacket folded neatly on the chair, a silent witness to the war she was fighting in the shadows of the mansion's grandeur. As the weeks turned into a month, the bond between the mafia boss and the chef deepened in the quiet hours of the night. Jung-hoon, plagued by the heavy burden of his empire, would often find himself drawn to the kitchen long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. He would find Aisha there. Her white chef had a soft moon in the dim light, as she prepared the slow-simmered stocks for the next day. These midnight encounters became their own sanctuary. "Why do you work so hard?" Jung-hoon asked one night, leaning against the marble counter as he watched her strain a broth. "You have the job. You have the money. Why are you still here at 3 in the morning?" Aisha looked at him, the steam dampening her forehead. "Because if I stop caring about the process, the food loses its power," she said. "And because I know what it's like to have nothing. I don't ever want to go back to that feeling." Jung-hoon nodded, his expression softening. "I know that feeling," he admitted, his voice a low confession. "I spent my youth fighting for a seat at a table that didn't want me. Now that I have the whole table, I find I have no appetite." Aisha set down her ladle and walked over to him, offering him a small taste of the soup. "That's because you were fighting for the seat, not the meal," she said gently. "You've spent so much time being the boss that you forgot how to be a human." Jung-hoon took the spoon, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was electric, a sudden spark of warmth in the cold kitchen. "You're the only person who talks to me like this," he said, searching her eyes. "Everyone else is afraid of me, or they want something from me. Why aren't you afraid?" Aisha smiled, a small, knowing expression. "Because I've seen the bottom of the world, Mr. Kong. A man with a gun is nothing compared to a woman with nothing to lose." Jung-hoon laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that echoed through the empty kitchen. "You are a rare creature, Aisha. I think I hired a chef, but I ended up with a mirror." He realized then that he wasn't just coming to the kitchen for the food anymore. He was coming for the way she made him feel, not like a boss, but like a man who was seen and understood. The emptiness in his chest was being filled, not just by her cooking, but by her presence. He began to wonder if there was a way to keep this feeling forever, to step out of the shadows and into the light she carried with her. The fragile peace of the mansion was tested when the heads of the 4 rival families demanded a banquet to discuss the shifting territories of the city. It was a high-stakes gathering where any sign of weakness could lead to a massacre. The rivals were already whispering about Jung-hoon's new chef, mocking him for letting a woman from the streets into his inner circle. On the night of the banquet, the grand dining hall was filled with dangerous men. When Aisha walked into the room to present the main course, dressed in her signature white chef outfit and hat, a heavy, mocking silence fell over the table. One of the rival bosses, a man named Mr. Song, let out a loud, disparaging laugh. "So, this is the secret weapon?" Song sneered, looking Aisha up and down. "She looks like she should be cleaning my boots, not serving my dinner. Has the black tiger lost his mind, or just his taste?" Jung-hoon's hand tightened around his glass, his eyes turning into chips of ice. "Careful, Song," he said, his voice a low warning. "Her hands have more power than your entire army." Aisha didn't wait for the men to stop their taunting. She stepped forward and placed a bowl of her most complex stew in front of Mr. Song. "A man who talks so much must be very hungry," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the room. "Please eat." It is difficult to speak the truth when your stomach is full of bitterness. The audacity of her words stunned the room. Song reached for his spoon, his face red with rage, intending to throw the food back at her. But the aroma hit him first, a smell so divine it seemed to paralyze his anger. He took a bite, and his entire demeanor changed. The tension left his shoulders, and his eyes widened in shock. The other bosses followed suit, and soon, the room was silent as they ate with a desperate intensity. "This is," Song started, his voice trailing off as he looked at Aisha with a new sense of respect. "I have never tasted anything like this." Aisha stood at the head of the table, her white chef hat held high. "That is because it was made with respect, something you seem to have forgotten," she said. Jung-hoon watched her with a pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. She had commanded the room, without a single weapon. She had turned a potential war into a moment of shared humanity. As the rivals left that night, they didn't talk about territory. They talked about the chef. Jung-hoon knew then that he couldn't let her go. She wasn't just his chef. She was his salvation. That night, after the guests had gone, Jung-hoon found Aisha in the garden, staring up at the moon. She had finally taken off her white chef hat, her hair falling softly around her shoulders. She looked exhausted but triumphant. Jung-hoon approached her, his footsteps silent on the grass. "You were incredible tonight," he said, standing beside her. "You did more for my business in 1 hour than my lawyers have done in a year." Aisha looked at him and sighed. "I didn't do it for your business," she said. "I did it because I was tired of them looking at me like I was nothing. I wanted them to know that I am a chef." Jung-hoon took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm. "You are so much more than that," he whispered. "Aisha, I've spent my life building walls to keep people out. But you walked right through them without even trying. I don't want to eat another meal that doesn't come from your hands, but more than that, I don't want to live another day where you aren't by my side." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "I know this isn't a traditional proposal," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "And I know my world is dangerous. But I want to change. I want to build something real with you. Will you marry me? Will you be the heart of my home, not as my chef, but as my wife?" Aisha looked at the ring, then back at the man who had been a monster to everyone but her. She saw the hope in his eyes, a flicker of light in the darkness. "If I marry you," she said, a small smile playing on her lips, "I'm still going to be the one in charge of the kitchen." Jung-hoon laughed and pulled her into his arms. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was finally full. The poor girl who had walked into the mansion with nothing but a white chef had conquered the king of the city, not with force, but with the power of a heart that refused to be silenced. The transformation of the Kong Empire was the talk of the city for years to come. Jung-hoon began to dismantle his criminal enterprises, moving his resources into legitimate businesses and community projects. He bought a beautiful, historic building in the center of Seoul and turned it into a world-class restaurant, naming it the White Hat. It wasn't just a place for the rich. It was a place where anyone could come and find a meal made with love. Aisha was the executive chef, her white chef outfit and hat becoming a symbol of hope and excellence throughout the country. On the opening night, the restaurant was packed with people from all walks of life, from street vendors she once knew to the elite who had once looked down on her. Jung-hoon stood at the entrance, welcoming guests, but his eyes were always on the kitchen window where he could see Aisha working. She moved with a grace and confidence that inspired everyone around her. She had hired the young maids and the struggling cooks from the mansion, giving them a chance to learn her craft. As the night wound down, Jung-hoon walked into the kitchen and found Aisha plating a final bowl of stew. "Is that for me?" he asked, his eyes warm with affection. "It's for the man who is brave enough to taste the truth," Aisha said, handing him the bowl. They sat together at a small table in the back of the kitchen, just like they had during those midnight meetings in the mansion. "You know," Jung-hoon said, taking a bite, "everyone says I'm the luckiest man in Seoul because I married the best chef in the world." Aisha leaned over and kissed his cheek. "And I'm the luckiest woman because I found a man who finally realized that the most important thing you can ever serve is kindness." As the sun rose over the city, the neon lights of Seoul reflected off the windows of the White Hat, a shimmering reminder that no matter how dark the world seems, a little bit of fire and a lot of soul can change everything. They had created a legacy that wasn't built on fear or power, but on the simple, profound act of feeding one another. And as you watch their story, remember that your own miracle might just be waiting in the next meal you share, if only you're brave enough to taste it.